to talk about one of my favorite topics again. So, yeah, that's movies. First of all, people might ask, might wonder here, I see a lot of new faces, what's a rotating detonation engine? Is the engine rotating? No, so you actually see here, it's a conceptual new kind of an engine, and I'll get into why we should be interested in that. What you see here is an annular cylinder. And the annular cylinder, what you see is the front of the detonation. So as long as you keep injecting the detonable mixture into the chamber, once you initiate the detonation is what's rotating. It goes around and around the annular chamber as you see here. And as long as you can maintain your mass flow rate, it should continue on its own. And then the products are exhausted out from the back end of the combustor. So my focus is, it's not an engine in the sense of all the complicated devices, so a lot more to be done for that. But my talk is more on the science behind it, so that people who I know, I just heard that you're beginning to work in this area, so you might encounter some of the things and more. And I've spoken about this in the previous few workshops, but I realized not all of you were there. And usually we talk about all the good things about that. So here I'm talking about some of the challenges, the difficulties, and hopefully the people who are getting into it now would find it of some use. So now first of all, why detonations? Now you would normally associate detonations with damage, explosions, unwanted kind of consequences. And like Professor Inman in the yesterday's talk talked about engine knock, and then you want to try to minimize and avoid detonation. But at the same time, we know that from nature, from the explosions and the damage it causes, detonations are very powerful. In fact, the same material, kerosene or whatever it is, if you have it in a bomb, it creates such a large damage. So the idea here is, can you harness that extra power to get useful propulsive power out of it? So let me go back to the first year thermodynamics here, and I'm sure some of you can relate to it. And this is a very simple, simplistic idea of classical Brayton cycle, which is what is behind many of our conventional propulsion devices, flaming combustion. So it's just a hypothetical PV diagram. All the students, I'm sure, familiar with it. You start with some material here, compress it, just arbitrarily to 10 atmosphere, could be any number. And then what you have after compression in the combustor, you ignite the flame, and then your flaming combustion. In theory, flaming combustion is a constant pressure process, so the pressure is constant here, and the products of combustion you exhaust, and that's the useful thing, you get the useful work out of it. Because in practical cases, you know, it's rather than a constant pressure process, usually there's a pressure loss also, small pressure loss. The pressure loss combustion process in reality. Now the question comes up is, what's the difference between this and like a bomb or an explosion? There is a constant volume process. So if you burn the same compression here you have, but you burn it now in a constant volume conditions. What happens then is the same material chemical conversion is taking place, same material, everything. But in addition to temperature rise, because of the confinement, the constant volume, the pressure also goes up. So that's where the term might talk pressure gain combustion. Rather than pressure loss combustion, what happens is pressure also rises so high. Temperature is like combustion temperature, chemistry you're not altering. And then you expand from there. So you get this additional work. In principle, in a thermodynamic cycle, you can get 20 to 25% extra performance out of it, which is a game changer. Because normally we are fighting for single-digit 4-5% gain by improving compressors, improving all these devices. And this is a different way of looking at it, but this is the basic fundamentals. Of course, our traditional approach has been to go to a higher and higher compression ratio. So if you go to 50, 60, higher end compression ratio, you can get the same gain. So this is another way of looking at it, is like very high compression ratio engine, and without the compressors. Because shock really gives you the compression. That's another way of looking at it. And constant volume is the fundamental process, and detonation you can show is a near constant volume combustion process, because of the rapidity of the process, and the shock provides like a confinement. So that's where you're harnessing the power of the confinement, the explosion in an engine kind of situation. Because you have the shock wave now going through this engine. So material issues are there, and that's one of the big challenges to be solved. So modeling, and people know me here, people who know me say, oh, I don't do any real work, I just do numerical simulation. So that's what I do really. So I managed to live for the last 40 plus years to earn a living out of that. So let me use that as an example here. What you can learn from numerical simulations. That's the subtitle of the talk. So this is the rotating detonation engine which we saw before. And for convenience, for easy visualization, most of my talk I'm going to unroll it, like split it open and just spread it out. So that's what is shown here. It's the same thing because sometimes it's very difficult to visualize what's inside there. And also this way for problems which are, like for example, narrow annular chambers, you can essentially do two-dimensional simulations. So the 3D effects are not that big. Of course, we have to do some 3D to verify the 2D is capturing a lot of the things. Even today's talk, I'll show both 2D and 3D. Because some effects which you have to do in 3D, you just have to pay the price and do. These are very, very expensive computations. So that's why we try to minimize that. So a lot of the simulations we do initially is in 2D because you can do a lot more parametric studies in that. And now what this also shows is that when you unroll it, you see the physics of it. So the blue region is this unburned detonable mixture which is coming in. And this is the shock front. You see the picture inside is a little more complicated. The first idea of a detonation is a shock followed by combustion. That's a very simplistic view. Detonation itself is really composed of multiple shock waves, and students probably in your combustion class they taught you about cellular structure of detonation, transverse waves, and it's a multi-dimensional wavefront when you look at it macroscopically in detail. So the dynamics depends upon that, and hopefully during the talk you get a better picture, feel for that. So what this shows is when you unroll it, this is the continuation of another part. So this blue is usually, light blue is the unburned mixture, it's the fuel mixture which is coming in. And then this is the front, and then you have a shear layer, the secondary shock wave. When you go into the process, it's a pretty complicated process. It's not as trivial as you would say, oh, there's a detonation just going around the tube. And you might wonder, why does it matter? What it matters is like when there's some dynamics, some instability and stuff like that, it might be tied to the fundamentals which is going inside. So today I want to talk about pressure gain. I mentioned in thermodynamics, it's a pressure gain process. Now the thing is, combustion process itself is a pressure gain, but you need to take some precautions in designing a system, otherwise you may not get all the pressure gain which you're expecting. Let me illustrate that. So what I've shown here is, as I said, we do numerical simulations, and during the talk you'll see increasing level of complexity of the simulations. First set of simulations was really where you really, there's injection. Injection is not really a finite injector. Good morning, welcome. So the injector numerically, one of the advantages of numerical simulations, you can do very ideal injection. That there be injection, and whatever mass flow rate you want, you can uniformly inject it using boundary conditions. So the first set of simulation, just to get an idea, is there's an imaginary injector here, which just injects you at a given mass flow rate, the flow into the combustor. And one factor effectively in the simulations, you say, if you got the entire annulus open, then the mass flow rate may be too much, and if the mass flow rate is too much, you have to time it such that as the detonation goes one round around the chamber, the new mass detonable mixture should be ready there. So there's an interesting dynamics. It's a little bit faster. What happens is two waves are generated. There's all sorts of other dynamics that are interesting based on the mass flow rate. So first step is just injecting it as a boundary condition. So what we show here is that in the injector boundary condition, in any of the cases of injector, some amount of the opening is blocked, right? You're not, if it's one, it's 100% open, then it's like just a straight tube. But then blockage-wise, you can talk about blockage ratio, or I call it area ratio. Area ratio 0.1 means 1/10. 10% of it is open, so mass flow is coming through that. Other part is solid phase. Then you can reject, you can directly map it to real injectors. But here's boundary condition, 10%, 20%, like that amount of flow opening. And what we show here is a set of numerical simulations from a number of calculations. Let's just take a case of a 20% open area. And in all the cases here, I've maintained the plenum, the upstream pressure constant. So you have the detonable mixture at 10 pressure, 10 atmosphere is where you're injecting in. And this is the, just on the inside of the combustor, beginning of the combustor, on the side of the inlet. Because once you have a blockage, when you're injecting at 10 atmosphere, it's always a pressure drop across the injector. So what you show here is from 10 atmosphere, the pressure drop takes it to roughly 3 atmospheres in that case. And then the combustion takes place, and this is now the pressure at the exit of the combustor, the top end of the right end of it. From 3 atmospheres, pressure gain takes it to 6.66 atmospheres, so there's pressure gain. By definition, there's pressure gain in all these cases in that. Now the thing is, if you have 30% open, goes from 4.25, there's a big pressure. Pressure drop is less as you open the injector more. And then you get to 9.39. The point is really that if it's like 0.1 per 10% open, pressure drop is so large that although there's a pressure gain in the combustion process, net there's a pressure loss already. The plenum pressure injecting at 10 atmosphere and out of the combustion you're getting only 4 atmosphere. So the system-wise it's a bad design where you don't gain anything at all out of it. So what this chart shows is like you need an opening like at least 40% open in the chamber, so that when from 10 atmosphere, it can be any number, it can be 5, 17, whatever number you like. Whatever it is, there's a pressure drop is small enough so that the pressure gain in the combustion process is more than the pressure drop here. Otherwise, why build this device at all? It's totally useless. This is some factor which, unless you start working on it, you don't realize at all. You say, I have pressure gain combustion, you design injector, whatever mass flow injector you have, and you say run the system and then you don't get any pressure gain out of it. And say, what's wrong with the theory of thermodynamics? It's not thermodynamics which is wrong, but the system design. So this is an illustration saying, you know, you need, like, this is just a ballpark because I said I've used injector as boundary conditions. So one of the rest of the talk is in terms of when you go towards more realistic injectors, what happens there. So first of all, now students might ask, okay, why don't we just have it 50% open or 75% open? Anybody working in high-speed propulsion immediately will know the answer. The thing is, once you have in a combustor high pressure, you know, you have that classical inlet unstart problem. The pressure is higher in the back end of it, and if you have the inlet opening, injector open, you have flashback and you get a pressure waves going back into the chamber. You'll see some pictures of that. So the big design issue here is if you don't want it, and the smaller the area ratio, there'll be less free feedback. But then you don't have the pressure gain. So it's a compromise between these two factors, that you don't want too much of feedback, but you also want the pressure gain. So how do you design these injectors, you know, suitably? And you need to have this work over a range of conditions, because you're not, you know, for a test case you can operate at one pressure point, but as you, in flight conditions, as you change at altitude and so on, your pressure and all these things are continuously changing. So dynamically it should adapt to it. So that's the theme of the talk, is what are the criteria between those. It's the same data I've shown in terms of holding a mass flow rate. You don't learn anything new, but some people associate easier with mass flow rate rather than, you know, for a practical case. The objective is the same. So what I say is, as the area ratios increase, more feedback can be expected from the combustion chamber into the pre-mixture plenum. And of course, if you have a detonation is a pre-mixed process. Unlike flaming, where you have pre-mixed flames and diffusion flame, detonation, one of the things is there's only pre-mixed detonation, there isn't a diffusion process there. The time scales are such that unless you have a good mixture, you won't, the detonation will fail. And the danger, of course, is if you have any feedback in there and flame, the pre-mixture will explode before it comes to the combustion chamber. You'll have a detonation in the inlet rather than in the combustor, and that's, of course, a disaster. So better understanding, what we need is a better understanding to isolate the pre-mixture plenum from the combustion chamber is essential in order to achieve a pure pressure gain combustion. That's the bottom line of the conclusion of the talk. Now I'll talk a little more in detail just for coupling this, just the baseline RDE stands for rotating detonation engine. It's 8 centimeters by the senior person, student who works with me, likes all in millimeter units, so it was skeptical that 8 centimeters by 10 centimeters. So just to get an idea of the dimension of the device. And these dimensions were chosen so that to mimic an experimental setup elsewhere. But I'm just showing the numerical simulations here, since that's all the work we are responsible for. That's pretty expensive calculation, you see, like in the 2D simulations, like 1.1, more than 1 million cells. And these are very time-accurate processes, so it's not just the grids which you need, but time-accurate solution for that in fractions of a microsecond. And like 10 power minus 8 microsecond is what the time step is roughly. And then 3D, of course, it becomes, you need really super computers, 51 million point for a 3D simulation for what I use here. And just for making chemistry less of an issue, we have done a lot of fuels, and including aviation fuel and JP10 and so on. JP10 is the US Navy's preferred fuel for this. Unless it works in that, they say, don't even do that work, you know. We're not going to change the fuel for you. And we wait till hydrogen becomes popular. But hydrogen, one of the things, is very easily detonable. Chemistry is relatively well understood. So just for modeling and simulation, we use that and for experimental validation, we do that. And the stagnation, pressure, temperature. And here I want to talk about, I talked about the boundary condition that showed the result. I want to take the next step. So boundary conditions, does it make any difference if you have different injectors? One thing in 2D geometry is to have like a parallel set of slots. So it's called like what I call a slot injector in 2D prevention. Then of course, practically you'll have tubes is the other way you have cylindrical tubes. So that's cylindrical micro injectors in 3 dimensions. And that's where the resolution is required because it's large. And third is a more a pintle type of injector. I'll show pictures of each of them. Why? I'm running that way. Let me go faster. So this is the little more detail of the injector, and this is what I mentioned as the opening of the throat area. So the thing which I want to appreciate is in these simulations, each of these, I have 50 micro injectors. You have gridded up each of these injectors. So that's where the computational cost is large. So one by one, all these injectors are in the simulations. And you want to see the. So let's look for a moment. The top is temperature flow field. Again, sunroof up there near the detonation going by. And you see the gases flowing in the detonable mixture. And the waves continuously coming back and continuously. So it keeps on going round and round with that. And you see the immediate problem here. I've shown the plenum here. As the pressure is very high here, you see these pressure waves which are going back upstream. This is what in a flight device it will lead to inlet unstart and so on. And in the actual cases, it could lead to premature ignition and disaster there, or you need to minimize that effect. There are many other pressure waves in the system and so on. And you see the flow field is a little more, quite a more complicated than what you initially think. And that's one of the things to watch out for students. As a change injector, watch how the flow field also changes. So now let's look at and now this is the 3-dimensional injectors, which is number of cylinders. Again, 50 of them are gridded up in detail. You got this moving to what I think. Compared to visually to the earlier cases, you see the flow begins to be even more complicated. If you look closely, that what happens is because the cylinder there are dead spots in between. So what happens, some of this mixture gets trapped in there, and if you go zoom into it, you can even see small vortices are there. So that again creates a problem for the next cycle in there. And that's what creates, like if you look at the front of it, let me come back here. The front becomes even more complicated here. You see a lot more turbulence in the structure there. And there are multiple shock waves and so on. And even in this pressure waves, you see a lot more dynamics in there as the injector is changed there. And realistic injectors will be even more complicated than that, a lot more turbulence. Even the waves which are going in there compared to this nice parallel waves in the first case, you see it's more complicated. Okay, this is the pintle injector. The reason I showed that is amazingly it makes a difference. Now the thing is much smoother, much cleaner kind of a thing, which is not intuitively what you guess. Again, there are 50 of them, and out of them the performance, I'll show the performance in a moment. Global solutions, similar to, if you time average other solutions, they all come to something like this. So if you want less structure, less turbulence in there, this kind of injector may be preferable for that. But also now we want to see what happens to the pressure waves. Oh, one more topic I want to address is with these real injectors or post-boundary conditions. One more aspect of realism here you capture. You guys are doing experiments or you still doing simulations yet? You're waiting to do experiments. So one of the things you find is that first shock when you do these experiments is you have multiple waves, which in theory you don't not people talk about it. Other than that, you see all sorts of interesting dynamics. Let's see if I can get this moving. So this is now the change in the two cases is just the fill pressure, 15 atmospheres and 3.75. So here what happens is two waves are generated and they collide with each other. But the amazing thing is, by the time the fresh mixture is injected, there are two waves and they are self-sustained and go. And this is something you see experimentally too, because you can't see it at this clearly visualization-wise at these time scales, and you know it's difficult for that. But this is a case in which unlike the other case, I started with the same case. Injecting only one wave and initiated that, but by nature it just sets up this two-wave kind of system at this condition. You see the injectors. Each of these things take a lot more time. I just want to give an overview of some of the things that you would expect to see. And now the only changes now the same injector and everything, but different operating pressure, 3.75. So you see what happens here. Initially it looks the same. After a few cycles, when it generates two waves, it can't sustain the it actually blows off. Equivalent of a flame off detonation dies there, and you can't keep it going at this condition. So it's important to understand these details because that puts a limit on your operating condition, even for the given geometry, given chamber size, and given injector. And these dynamics, similar things you see, like in experiment, what you would also, and simulations you see sometimes is depending on the mass flow rate, for example, if you increase it too much, you have multiple waves. One wave goes into two, like which you saw here, two goes to 3, 4, like that, different number of waves. Because theoretically now we know enough to estimate what would be the stable number of waves. But that many waves will be stable after that. For a given configuration, if you start with the wrong number, the nature will go to the right stable number for that configuration. But the thing is, some cases there's no stable solution and it completely dies. The details of this is very reproducible. Simulation, of course, is reproducible. Experimentally, also, you can reproduce the phenomena. But all the details of the dynamics and stuff like that is where PhD students are required to do the detailed understanding of that. It's the form of combustion dynamics in this chamber and in this geometry. That's, now let me quickly, have a couple of more minutes. I started late. It's usually excuse for the speakers, right? So let me just also touch upon performance. A couple of more slides and wrap it up. Performance-wise, the bottom line here is I've shown too many data points here, but two things. One is the area ratio of 0.2, the small injector. All of the different injectors, they tend to collapse. There seems to be very little difference in the performance. But for the large area opening, 0.4, which is the more practical one, which you want for pressure gain, there is significant performance changes. So what I have here is larger area ratio results in a larger decrease in performance from 2.4 to 7.7. So this ideal boundary condition, of course, as you would expect, is like an upper limit of the performance. So you shouldn't be too worried if you don't get the full theoretical performance. So it is a function of your, like your injector and exhaust nozzle, all of them will nature-wise will decrease the performance. It's not a huge performance drop, but there is a performance drop. And the performance drop off at low and high pressures, you need to be typically there. So you need to, there's a lot more to be understood here. At this stage, people have built these devices and so on, and they run. And you see similar things in the experiments as well as what we see in simulation. So what we work on is that diagnostics is very difficult at these temperatures, pressures, and time scales. So use the simulation to simulate your particular experimental setup, understand the details of what's going on, and then try to redesign your system to avoid those problems or minimize the problems. Let me quickly go to. These are the, you saw those pressure waves going upstream. So what I have is a numerical sensor upstream and looking at taking 0.2 and 0.4. You see a big difference in the pressure fluctuation. And you see pressure fluctuation which you see there in the waves are significant. These are things you can't tolerate in a propulsion system in terms of upstream pressure waves. And this is just for a slot microinjector, but each of them I have the details for that. So the thing is, how do you modify your inlet injectors to minimize this pressure oscillation? You know, and that it's actually, if you minimize your pressure feedback, you'll minimize pressure oscillation, but still maintain the pressure gain. Thus, as I mentioned, the higher opening 0.4, which is larger pressure oscillation, is the one which will give you better performance. So there's this compromise between the two, and the design of these injectors, if nothing else you get from my talk is the design of your injectors is absolutely critical. You can have a system failure, completely disaster, you know, in your lab, or for good performance you need better design of that. And this is a summary of the pressure feedback. Let me just skip all that. Different pressure ratios, normalize that and shown the range of pressure oscillations in different cases for that. It'll take a little more time for that, but anybody really interested in it after the talk in the break, and we glad to talk with you on that. I don't want to take too much of your time. So concluding remark here is baseline RD geometry with the planar injector plane simulated. We all start with boundary conditions because it's easier to do. But the thing is, even for this problem, even for this very simple device, boundary conditions won't tell you the whole story. When you really think of it, with the boundary condition, mathematically the problem is very close, but doesn't represent physical reality. You're imposing something on the flow. With boundary conditions, there's no flow back, right? Automatically this pressure is going back and everything are eliminated from the solution. So mathematically you can't find the solution without this feedback, which may be very far from your reality. Which is what triggered us to do that, because in experiment they were finding these two-wave systems and they were having suddenly the whole detonation just quenching or dying. So the simulation did a big help in terms of understanding what's going on and what conditions you can set. And 3 different injectors we showed there. Performance results similar to ideal. What I call as ideal micro injector is the boundary condition one. It's like an upper limit, easier one there. At lower area ratios, they are very similar, but unfortunately, you don't want to operate at low. For the initial trial, you can do low area ratio to understand the system, but practically you need higher. Feedback in the plenum is significant for all higher area ratio cases, and those are the cases which are interesting. Stability results show reduced stability at low and high plenum pressures. The two pressures, moderate and in between pressures, they work very stable, like 3.5 and 15 actually. The two ranges, higher ends of it, the operating envelope is defined with stability. You need to really understand and get a good clue, a good handle on that to operate over a range of conditions. And then further recommended research for the students here, effect of injectors with isolators. Again, people who worked in high-speed flows always know the ramjets and everything. You have isolators upstream. So the problem of feedback is not entirely new. In all these high-speed systems and shock-induced combustion, there's usually isolated upstream which will prevent the inlet shock and start and so on. The thing is, how do you adapt that into your injector design? Another thing is here I make the problem, first set of problem I made it easier. I assume in the plenum chamber you already have a detonable mixture which is pre-mixed, perfectly mixed and injected. Practically you never do that, because if you have a feedback and a flame or something ignites that, you'll have a big disaster. So you really need to do non-premixed reactants. You have instead of one injector, there will be 2 injectors, and there's one more time scale involved with the mixing in that. And that's the thing. So with that, I think Oh, okay. Just to give an idea, I know you guys you are brilliant students here. If you can get my movies working, you can get the graphic design that injectors. So just some rough ideas what we have looked at in terms of isolators for other work is cavity slot. Instead of the simple injectors we have nozzle slot, diode slot. Diode slot is attempts to create a nozzle so the propagation of the waves upward is favorable compared to downward into the mixture planar. So you can come up, you're creative engineers, you can come up with different designs, and I would suggest like do numerical simulations and find out which are the better ones and do that. I have results for that, but I won't take your patience more on that. I just wanted to introduce the topic. So thank you and any questions.
Okay, we have time for a few questions. This question from the students are most encouraging.
And I'll be here for the rest of the day and tomorrow. I'll be glad to talk with you in more detail if you have any questions.
Please. Okay.
You are simulating with a constant chamber pressure.
Yeah.
But and also the flow rate is fixed, right? That's you are giving as the input.
Yeah.
Then when you have so much of oscillations
Yeah.
in the pressure, delta P is changing with time. So won't that affect the flow rate as well?
Yeah, we allow the flow rate to fluctuate. We specify the initial or average flow rate. In reality,
That's
that's
the average flow rate.
yeah. Actual flow rates will change that. And actually, you have done simulations where you have it like in a flight condition. What will happen is your pressure is continuously changing as the flight Mach number changes, right? Those results we can't show, like in actual device kind of stuff. You see different conditions, what you go through different operating conditions.
So actually my question is not for the detonation engine but other like rocket engines and all.
Yeah.
When experimenting you have seen that the pressure feedback in the fuel injection system leads to massive increase in instabilities.
Yes.
And it becomes, the flame just quenches out.
Quenches out. Similar things you
So
see.
actually it grows with time and
yeah.
within a few seconds it will just
Yeah. That's why you need, our proposal, you need to minimize that feedback as much as, and at the same time, to keep maintaining your performance. So it's a design challenge in that. And people have actually done it because they have devices operating, and Russia actually launched one of these things for flight testing here.
The effect of the stagnation temperature. That you have done all the simulation for 300 K.
Yeah.
Now in the actual flight condition,
Yeah.
there will be a difference.
Yeah.
So that if you increase the speed, the air temperature will be increasing.
Yeah.
But this is the effect of that will be in the plane will be quenching faster and all those things.
Yeah, it's a long answer. We can talk more later. But it's a very critical issue. Not only the temperature, but the alternate condition density. See, the detonation is very sensitive to pressure, initial temperature, and correspondingly.
All the ambient conditions.
Yeah. So for lean condition or altitude. But a range with simulations we have done that, and more, flight. Typically, what we do is for the flight conditions like Mach 3 and Mach 4 flight, what would be the inlet, like a convention inlet. We work with Tom Kenning, you probably come across his name. He's a big inlet guy. He's also retired now. But we work on some inlet designs, notional inlet designs, and then give the conditions which goes into the chamber. And that inlet combustor interaction is even more complicated, even the simple missile design if you have. Some of those results I can't present in an open audience. But you're perfectly right. The dynamics is very sensitive to your altitude and flight conditions. But here we are looking at, can you define the conditions at lab scale? The idea is in lab scale you can do and validate your simulations. There are so many assumptions in the simulation. And then use it for flight testing, flight condition testing, and minimize the number of flight tests which you have.
Is there any effect on the cellular structure with the change in area ratio? Cellular structure of the detonation?
Cellular structure, yes. And the cellular structure, funny thing is, we don't understand why. With the pintle injector, the same resolution, everything, physics can't change, right? Some of the cellular structure, hardly you see that. But with all the other injectors, you see the defined scale structures. But you do see the difference. Because conceptually, these instabilities are related to the cellular structure of detonation. And when you say when it goes from one wave to two wave, it takes too much time. I can talk more and there's a break with that. It goes from one wave to two wave. It's directly related to the cellular structure of detonation. Because if you even take a straight channel and if you ignite with one wave, the cellular structure, if it's a four wave is the stable configuration for it, nature will trigger automatic ignition to settle the same number of chambers. We'll be talking about it. Yeah. That's an important parameter too. Thank you.
With that, I think it's time to move on. Let's thank our speaker again.